It's early in the morning, March 1st, 2000. John Price had told his fellow employees that if he did not show up for work, Kathrine had did him in. Police are at the door. They notice blood on the doorknob, so they force entry. What lied beyond that door was a crime so brutal it would shake Australia to its very core. Welcome to Find Me in the Dark, a podcast covering all things true crime. This is episode 2, Katherine Knight, the Black Widow Cannibal. Hey, welcome back to Find Me in the Dark. I am your host, Eric Phillips, along with my co-host, Robert Prestige.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Yeah, man. So we got a really good response from that last episode.
Hell yeah, we did.
I think, I don't know, YouTube has like 600, and the last time I checked, 637 views or something like that. And then I don't know what the numbers are for Spotify and everything else.
We're pushing close to 800 views for that first episode.
Yeah, that's insane, man.
Yeah, it definitely is, man. We want to definitely want to thank some people that have supported us. Josh Bessler, Rhonda Cisco, Terry Phillips, Ryan Caldwell, Bill Faline, Gino Rathbone, Mikey Hebner, Ashley Malatesta, Rachel Biardi, and Jeff Brown. Thank you guys so much for your support and your love, going out and buying some merch, helping us out in different ways. We can't begin to thank you guys enough.
Yeah, and Jeff Brown's the one that wrote the music and everything for this episode. So we're gonna put his artist information in the links for YouTube and stuff, and on our Facebook, so you guys can go like that page and give him props for doing all this stuff for us. So today's episode
2.
Oh, you know what, I have to shout this Facebook group out. This Facebook group is called Tales of True Crime, and they are easily the best group on Facebook for true crime, because all these other true crime groups won't let you post your content in there. It's like, you can post other people's content, that's fine, but if you're actually an artist making stuff, making podcasts, making whatever you make, they won't allow you to post it in there. So every other true crime group, you suck. Tales of True Crime is the best. Yeah, anyways, now today's case is brutal,
to say the least.
Yeah, brutal.
Good old
Katherine Knight, man. But yeah, we'll give you a little bit of a warning here, because there's so much gross stuff going on in this episode. So if you don't like blood, guts, or eating butts, then maybe turn this one off. Also, if you're an animal lover, you might want to skip a certain part. There's a pretty brutal story of stuff that she does to an animal that nobody's gonna like, really.
Yeah, this is definitely one you don't want your kids to listen to.
Yeah, I don't know why you would want your kids to listen to any of this, but yeah. So, thank you, everybody. We appreciate all the 5-star ratings and the really nice comments that you guys have been leaving. So, get ready for it. Here we go, Katherine Knight. So the first thing we're going to be covering is Katherine's childhood, which is dysfunctional to say the least. Born to Barbara and Ken Knight on October 24th, 1955, in a place called Tenterfield, New South Wales. She was the younger of a set of twin girls. Katherine's mother, Barbara, had 4 sons from a previous marriage to a guy named Jack Ruffin. Kathrine was born as a result of an extramarital affair when her mother, Barbara, cheated on her husband at the time with a co-worker of his, Ken Knight. Barbara and Ken went on to have 2 additional children that were both boys. The affair was such a massive scandal in Aberdeen that they had to pack up and move to a place called Moree, which is about 229 miles north of Aberdeen. Though not the whole family went along with the move. The 2 eldest boys stayed with their father in Aberdeen, while the 2 youngest moved in with their aunt in Sydney. When Kathrine was 4, Jack passed away. The 2 oldest boys who were living with Jack moved in with Barbara and Ken. This now makes 4 boys and the twin girls living together. Now, Ken was an extreme alcoholic. He would often use violence to rape his wife up to 10 times a day. Now, Barbara often told her daughters about her sexual escapades in great detail and voiced her absolute disdain for men in general. Now, I tend to believe that these conversations had a tremendous effect on Kathrine and instilled an irrational hatred for men that would become a major factor in her future behavior development.
Kathrine has made many claims that she was brutally sexually assaulted up until age 11 by family members. Now, this excludes her father. Besides her twin sister, the only family member Kathrine had any affection for was her uncle Oscar. Oscar committed suicide when Kathrine was only 14 years old. This was absolutely devastating for Kathrine, losing a loved one at such a fragile age. The same year Oscar took his own life, the family packed up and moved to their previous place of residence, Aberdeen, as a result of there being steady work for Ken, who was a very skilled butcher. Kathrine attended Muswell Brook High School. This is where her devious and violent behavior came to light. Kathrine frequently got into violent interactions with her fellow students and faculty members. She was widely considered to be a mean-spirited bully to a majority of those who attended school with her. For example, on one occasion, when one of her classmates tried to trip her while she was getting on a bus, Kathrine responded by cutting off the girl's ponytail. During a separate altercation, Kathrine smashed a boy's teeth into the back of a bus seat for making a derogatory comment about her early developing breasts.
God damn, man. Kathrine, when she wasn't terrorizing her peers, was considered to be a model student. In fact, she won many awards for her behavior. Kathrine learned very little during her time in school, eventually dropping out after her sophomore year without the skills of reading and writing. Shortly after dropping out of school, Kathrine landed a job as a cutter at a local clothing company, but that job was short-lived as she quit to work her dream job, working with her father at the slaughterhouse. At 16 years old, Katherine's job was to decapitate the pigs, but she frequently left her post going to the front of the line to watch the pigs initially get their throats cut, as she enjoyed hearing the screams. Katherine's obsession with death and pain made her co-workers uncomfortable. Many of them questioned her reasoning for being there in the first place. Kathrine swiftly advanced through the ranks at the slaughterhouse, eventually landing the highly touted job of deboner alongside her father. Her employers quickly recognized her talent for her position and gifted her her very own custom set of extremely sharp knives. She grew so attached to these knives that when her shift was over, she would go home and hang her custom set of knives above her bed. When asked why she hung the knives above her bed, her response was, "So they would always be handy if I need them."
Huh. Wow.
Yeah, that's a good plan. Let's give this lady some knives. The lady that loves hearing the screams of pigs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into the marriage of David Kellett. Knight first met David Kellett in 1973. He was a heavy drinking coworker that had a close relationship with her brother. Kathrine and David eventually became very close friends. They frequented bars together, drank heavily, and got into brawls on a regular basis. Within only 1 year of their friendship, Kathrine and David eloped. On the morning of their wedding, Kathrine and a highly intoxicated Kellett arrived at the church on a motorcycle. Knight in the driver's seat and Kellett riding on back, which is a peek into their personal relationship. Kathrine definitely called the shots. Katherine's mother, Barbara, had some pre-wedding advice for David. She had been quoted as saying, You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do anything wrong and you're fucked. Don't ever think you're playing her. She'll fucking kill you. Such lovely words of encouragement on the day of their wedding. Their wedding night was far from magical. Katherine had her standards set high. Katherine wanted to have sex more times than her mother and father did on their big wedding night.
So like we stated earlier in the episode, Barbara was very open about her sex life with Katherine and had told her that her father was able to do it 5 times on their wedding night. Now, when David was unable to fulfill her wishes, having sex only 3 times, he passed out from exhaustion and intoxication. This threw Katherine into an uncontrollable rage. In an attempt to wake David up and force him to continue having sex, she slapped him in the face multiple times. When she realized her efforts were not paying off, she climbed on top of David and began strangling him as he lied there helpless on the bed. David, by some miracle, was able to wake up and defend himself before losing consciousness. He was able to fight his way out of the attack and made his way to the bathroom, which was the only room in the house that had a lock on the inside. He climbed into the bathtub and fell into a drunken sleep. Katherine came pounding on the door in an attempt to wake David and force him to continue having sex. Luckily, David was too heavily intoxicated to wake up, and the door was strong enough to keep Katherine from unleashing her rage on him. After the initial hiccup on their wedding night, their relationship actually became peaceful and loving.
Yeah, for now. Katherine was set on fulfilling her wifely duties of cooking and cleaning and taking care of her man. Shortly after their wedding, Katherine became pregnant. A pregnant Knight was a woman capable of extreme violence. After an argument, she burned all of David's clothing and shoes, hit him over the head with a frying pan hard enough to severely fracture David's skull, all because he was late coming home after he partook in a dart tournament. Police wanted to charge Katherine for assault of David, but Katherine was a master manipulator and was able to convince David to drop all charges. Shortly after they had their first child, Melissa Ann, David had grown tired of the constant emotional and physical abuse, packed up his things and abandoned his wife and daughter to move in with his mistress out in Queensland. Leaving his daughter in the care of Katherine proved to be a massive, massive mistake. The next day after David left, Katherine was witnessed pushing her daughter in a stroller, violently whipping her stroller back and forth. This unstable and abusive behavior resulted in Katherine being admitted to a mental hospital, where she was swiftly diagnosed with postpartum depression.
She spent several weeks in the hospital, but was able to use her manipulation skills to be discharged. Immediately after her release, Knight took her 2-month-old daughter and placed her on the railroad tracks shortly before the train was scheduled to arrive. She then went and stole an axe from a random backyard, went downtown, and was witnessed swinging the axe violently in the air and threatening the lives of her fellow citizens. Luckily, back at the train tracks, a local man stumbled upon the child after hearing her crying and removed her from the tracks mere minutes before the train arrived. Knight was immediately arrested and ordered back to the mental hospital, where it was decided she had recovered, and she signed herself out the very next day. After her release from the hospital, only a few days later, Knight goes to the neighbor Maggie's house and requests she drives her to Queensland to take her son to the hospital. Maggie agrees to take Katherine and her son to the hospital. When Maggie gets into the car along with her little brother, Katherine reveals her true plan. Knight pulls out a knife, slashes Maggie in the face, and forces her to drive her to find David. Shortly after they started their drive, Maggie pulls into a petrol station to refuel to avoid running out of gas during the drive. Katherine stayed in the car with the little boy as Maggie went in to pay for the gas. Maggie told the attendant what was happening and urged the man to call the authorities. Katherine quickly realized what was happening and held the boy at knife point.
The police arrived shortly after the attendant called and were able to disarm Katherine with broomsticks, which resulted in a foot pursuit. Katherine was quickly apprehended and brought back to the mental hospital. This time she was held for months and diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. While Katherine was being held in the institution, her daughter was placed in the care of Barbara and Ken Knight. During her time at the mental institution, Katherine told the nurses she planned to kill the mechanic that fixed David's car so that he could make the trip to Queensland. She then voiced her plan to drive to Queensland and kill David and his mother. David was informed by authorities that Katherine had once again been admitted to the mental institution, and hearing the news, David left his mistress and along with his mother, drove back to be with Katherine.
Yeah, upon their arrival, Kathrine was released into the custody of David and her mother-in-law. After Kathrine's release, her, David, and her mother-in-law went to Knight's parents' house to pick up their daughter. David knocked on the door since Kathrine was still sedated from the medication that was given to her at the hospital. Barbara opens the front door. She immediately berates David, saying, "What did you do to my daughter, you cheating piece of sheep shit?" She then lunges at David, grabbed him by his hair, and knocked him off his feet. She continues beating and kicking David while he was lying defenseless on the ground. Kathrine, in her medicated state, was able to muster up the strength to get out of the car, storm her way up the path, and smashed her mother in the face without any warning. Barbara flew back onto her own doorstep. Kathrine screamed at her, "Don't you ever lay a hand on David again. He saved me. You left me to rot. He came back for me." Kathrine then pushed her way into the house and found her daughter asleep in her father's arms. She quickly snatched her up and ran out of the house. Kathrine, David, and their daughter moved back into the place that David was renting. Immediately, Kathrine's violent antics started again, verbally and physically abusing David constantly, sometimes for absolutely no reason at all.
Despite her constant abuse, on March 6, 1980, the couple welcomed in yet another daughter, Natasha Marie. The couple managed to stay together until one day in 1984 when Kathrine gave David exactly what he wanted. She packed up all of her belongings, the children, and moved into her parents' farmhouse just outside of Aberdeen. Kathrine picked up right where she left off. She got her job back at the local slaughterhouse, but unfortunately, after only a year, she had to give up her career due to back pain from constantly bending over the carcasses. She was able to obtain government assistance due to her inability to work. Along with the monthly disability check, the government also supplied her with a place to live. Kathrine didn't sit still for long, though. She began visiting the local pubs, looking for a new man to terrorize. This is when she met David Saunders.
Hey, let's take a short break so I can tell you about this really awesome bakery in Winthrop Harbor, Illinois, called the Sweet Stop. It's a mother-daughter owned small-town bakery. We feature all-natural, home-baked products, custom-made cakes, gluten-free and vegan available, sugar-free available upon request. Try our homemade soups, chili, and sandwiches. We have a variety of homemade dinners on the go, available every day. The Sweet Stop also caters food every Friday night at Harbor Brewing Co. So, like I said, if you're in the area, Lake County, Kenosha County, you need a cake, you need some food, go ahead and hit up the Sweet Stop in Winthrop Harbor, Illinois. Kathrine and David began their relationship in 1986. In typical Kathrine fashion, after only a few months of dating, David moved in with Kathrine and the girls. Quickly after David moved in, Kathrine continued her typical abusive behavior. She became irrationally jealous and was constantly accusing David of being unfaithful. She frequently kicked him out of the apartment, but luckily David kept his apartment so he would have a place to stay when Kathrine threw her violent fits. Just as quickly as she kicked him out, she would be at his door begging him to come back, and unfortunately, Kathrine was David's weakness, so he would ultimately oblige. This always proved to be a massive mistake on David's part. The violence not only would continue, but would escalate to truly horrifying levels. During one of Kathrine's manic meltdowns, she confronted David, accusing him of sleeping with another woman. As an act of revenge, she grabbed David's 2-month-old puppy and slit its throat from ear to ear in front of him. But that was just the beginning of her outburst. She then got a frying pan and smashed David over the head with it, rendering him unconscious. I guess this wasn't enough to scare David off.
So in June of 1988, they welcomed their first child together, Sarah. This motivated David to purchase a house, which Kathrine would eventually pay off with her workman's comp. This being Kathrine and David's first house, Kathrine wanted to make it her own. She had a very particular decorative taste and would hang animal skins, traps, skulls, and knives throughout the house, like some tacky high-end slaughterhouse. But the happiness doesn't last. Soon after they purchased the house, Kathrine smashed David with a frying pan and proceeded to stab him in the chest over absolutely nothing. David didn't press charges against Kathrine, but he did pack up and move back into his apartment. After only a week of having moved out, David decided it was time to go back with Kathrine. When David got back to the house, he was shocked at what he walked into. Kathrine had cut every single piece of clothing he owned into hundreds of tiny pieces. Out of all the things Kathrine had done, this one was the last straw. David takes a leave of absence from work and goes into hiding, hoping Kathrine will never find him. David couldn't stay gone long. He missed his daughter too much. So after only a few months of being in hiding, he returned into town, only to find out that Kathrine had went to the police and told them that she was scared David would hurt her if she ever returned. This resulted in the police issuing an AVO that would legally keep him away from Kathrine and her children.
So in 1990, Kathrine met yet another heavy drinking man named John Chillingsworth. Shortly after meeting, as expected by now, the couple gave birth to a baby boy named Eric. Kathrine stuck to her pattern of abuse. John admitted to slapping Kathrine once after she slapped his glasses off his face and smashed his false teeth into pieces. The relationship continued in a downward spiral, and after only 3 years together, Kathrine left John for a man that she had been having an affair with for some time, John Price.
She's been branded a danger to the community, capable of murdering anyone who crosses her.
I got a phone call from VKG, which is police radio, telling us there'd been a murder. And I said to the operator, I said, well, how do you know it's a murder? I said, well, he's been decapitated.
So John Price was a hard-working, hard-drinking, divorced father of 3. After the split from his then-wife, the youngest daughter stayed with her mother, while the 2 oldest went with Pricey. Pricey was a well-known man in the community. He was considered to be relatively successful working at the local mine. John was well aware of Kathrine's violent history with men, but he believed this time around it would be different. He was wrong. The relationship started just as the others did. Everyone was happy. John and his children got along so great with Kathrine and her children, so much so that they moved into Pricey's house to be closer with each other. As expected, this bliss didn't last. Kathrine and Price frequently got into violent altercations, resulting in them separating and then, of course, quickly getting back together. Kathrine desperately wanted to get married, but John refused. John wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, his girls would get his house and his assets. This drove Kathrine mad. In fact, it infuriated her so much that she took out her video camera and filmed the first aid kit that Pricey had stolen from work. She planned to show this to Pricey as a way of blackmailing him into marriage, but after yet another knockdown, drag-out fight, she took it one step further by sending it to his employer.
Yeah, this resulted in Pricey being fired from the mine after 17 years of employment. John had had enough. He broke things off with Kathrine, forcing her to move back into her own house. After only a few months of separation, Pricey took her back on the terms that they would no longer live together. Even though they weren't living under the same roof, the fights didn't stop, and in no time, Kathrine had free reign of Pricey's house once again. The toxic relationship between Kathrine and Price was affecting John's personal life. None of Pricey's friends wanted anything to do with him as long as he was still with Kathrine. In February of 2000, Kathrine assaulted Price on multiple occasions. On February 29th, an argument got so out of control that Kathrine ended up stabbing Price in the chest. This proved to be the final straw for Pricey.
So after Kathrine stabbed him, Price stopped at the courthouse on his way to work to take out a restraining order on her, legally barring her from contacting him or his children. After his shift, Price spent the evening at the local bar with his friends. He told them all about the stabbing and said, "If I don't show up for work tomorrow, she did me in." His friends begged him not to go home, but Price feared that if he didn't, Kathrine would hurt the children. After a few drinks, Pricey bids his friends farewell and leaves for home. John arrived at the house around 11 p.m. to find that Kathrine had sent the children away to a sleepover at a friend's house. After Price had fallen asleep, Kathrine used her key to make her way into the house, where she sat and watched a little TV. She then took a shower, put on a skimpy black lingerie that she bought earlier that day, and made her way into John's bedroom. She was able to wake up Price and seduce him. They had sex, and shortly after they were done, Price had fallen back to sleep.
It's now 6 a.m. on March 1st. John's neighbor noticed that his work truck was still in his driveway. This is concerning considering the conversation they had had the night before. When John didn't show up for work, his boss sent another worker over to check on him. Both the neighbor and the co-worker tried knocking on John's bedroom window to wake him up, but nobody answered. They made their way to the front door, and this is when they noticed the blood on the doorknob. At about 8 a.m., they called the police to do a wellness check on John. Police arrive after seeing the blood. They decide to force entry through the laundry room in the back of the house. They take their first steps into the house. It is pitch black, and their service pistols did not have lights on them. They make their way through the laundry room towards the doorway to the lounge room. The officer pushes the curtain out of the way and walks into the lounge. He immediately freezes. Something cold is dripping down his left arm. He looks at his sleeve and notices it is drenched in blood. He thinks to himself, "Did I cut myself breaking into the house?" He checks his arm for wounds, but finds none. This is when he turns around and notices that the curtain he pushed out of the way was in fact not a curtain at all. It was the flesh of John Price, hanging from a meat hook in the doorway.
I went up, knocked on the door, didn't get an answer, saw some blood on the door jamb. Looked through a little gap into the lounge room, which was dark, reasonably dark, and saw what looked like a bunched up curtain hanging down. Couldn't raise anybody, so I decided we'd go and break into the place, seeing as we had this complaint. I walked around the side, there was a piece of meat just lying on the ground, and anyway, went round the back, broke in through the back door. As we went in, I saw straight ahead of me what I thought was a curtain.
There was something hanging, blocking my entry into the hallway of the house. I thought it looked like some type of blanket or some sort of covering that had been placed up on the archway. So I remember I used my left hand to push it aside, and immediately I could feel coldness coming on my left arm. So I looked down and my left arm was just covered in blood. Initially I thought I'd injured myself breaking through the back door, so I couldn't understand why my arm was bleeding.
I realised then it was a human pelt. It was the skin minus the head. A full skin just hanging from the top door frame. Looked past it and saw a torso on the ground without a head and without any genitalia. And I think my first reaction then was to turn around to Scotty and say, "Don't look, Scotty." Of course, that's the worst thing you could say.
I could look through there, from there into the lounge room, and I saw what appeared to be, a human being, or what was left. And so it was at that point that I'd realised, what had happened.
The officers compose themselves and continue through the house. They enter the lounge where they find the decapitated and posed corpse of Price. The body was carefully arranged with the left arm draped over a soda bottle and the legs crossed, one over another. On the floor in front of the posed corpse was a massive bloodstain. It appears this is where the body was skinned and the head was removed. There are blood drips leading from the initial stain where the body had been directly into the kitchen. The officers follow the drips. There is blood everywhere. As they get closer to the kitchen, they notice a smell in the air. One of the officers described the smell as a sweet smell, like your mom was cooking a stew.
We came in through the laundry at the back of the premises, and there's an aroma, and it was quite a macabre thing. It's a sweet odour, nice odour, as if mum's cooking a stew. When we examined the body, you could see the body has been there in its entirety. There was a big stain on the floor where the head would have been. It's been skinned first. You can see where she'd placed the skin on the carpet to set it there, and it's quite a substantial staining. There's also an outline of the head, so she's then taken the head off there. You can see where she's walked in carrying it to the kitchen. There's a drip, 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 drip of blood all the way leading to the cooktop. But until we actually lifted the lid off, it wasn't confirmed.
They enter the kitchen. The blood drops end at the stove where the pot is sitting. A flame is still lit beneath it. The first officer walks over to the pot, turns the burner off, and lifts the lid. He is overcome with fear. The head of John Price has been boiling on the stove for who knows how long. There is a meal on the kitchen table, complete with gravy, steak, and vegetables. There were 4 meals in total. Each meal had the name of John's family members underneath it. The steaks were made from the gluteus maximus of John Price. 4 steaks on the table and 1 thrown into the backyard, possibly meant for the dog.
They go in and there's a meal on the table, for God's sake. There's vegetables, there's gravy, there's his meat, which he's cooked in the oven. If you saw it in a horror movie, you'd almost laugh because it's just so over the top. These are the things those coppers saw that day, and these are things that never leave them.
To me, they were a statement. She had cut, I think it's the gluteus maximus, the doc called it, off his backside. And it's a big muscle. And she's cut that into 5 different steaks, and she's cooked them, baked them in the oven. 2 of them were on one plate, 2 on another plate, and the 5th one was out for the dog, I believe. But it wasn't touched. But the meals were there like a trophy. They had the names of each person who was supposed to get them.
So the police notice in a small display cabinet a broken picture frame with a handwritten note on top that reads, "Time you got back, Jonathan, for raping my daughter. You too, Beck. For Ross. For Little John. Now play with Little John's dick. John Price." They follow the blood spatter upstairs to the hallway. There is a massive puddle of blood outside of John's bedroom that spreads the entire width of the hall. Blood all over the walls that continue to get lower and lower as John succumbs to his injuries. They can hear snoring coming out of the bedroom. Someone is in the house. With their pistols drawn, the police enter the bedroom, where they find Katherine Knight sleeping in John's bed. They attempt to wake her up, but to no avail.
The officers see that Katherine had taken a significant amount of sleeping pills in an attempt to take her own life, so they carry Katherine out to the backyard and call for medical assistance. The ambulance takes Knight to the hospital, where she would recover from her suicide attempt for 5 days, before they eventually interrogate her and ultimately charge her with murder. The interrogation was less than informative, to say the least. Upon questioning her about the night's events, Katherine claims she doesn't remember anything that happened after her and John had sex. Further into the investigation, it was uncovered that the night Price was murdered, Katherine withdrew $1,000 from John's account. To this day, nobody knows where the money went.
Can't remember anything.
Do you recall yourself going to bed?
Faintly.
All right, so now let's talk about this trial. During the trial, Katherine enters a plea of not guilty, even though she had admitted that she was responsible for the death of John Price. As the trial continues, for a reason that to this day nobody can explain, Katherine changes her plea from not guilty to guilty. This turn of events worried the judge. He was concerned that if she were to plead guilty and receive a life sentence, she would appeal and claim she was temporarily insane at the time she changed her plea. Before he made his decision, the judge ordered Katherine to see a court-appointed psychiatrist to determine if she was sane. The psychiatrist came to the conclusion that she was absolutely sane and knew what she was doing was wrong. She was just simply evil.
The judge accepts her guilty plea. The jury was dismissed. Even though the jury was dismissed, the brutal evidence was still displayed and witnesses were still heard. Katherine would constantly manipulate the court. For example, when the crime scene was being described, Katherine began to rock back and forth and throw a screaming fit. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every time she threw these tantrums, the court was delayed. Regardless of her many outbursts, the sentence was passed down. Katherine Knight was the first woman in Australia to be given a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Wow, man. That's such a really crazy story. Like, man, Katherine.
Almost unbelievable.
Hey, how many red flags, though, really?
Yeah, for real.
I mean, there's so many red flags. I mean, hey, how do you go to the mental hospital and just tell them, like, I'm good, man.
Yeah, I'm all right.
I'm all right.
Sure thing. Here,
give me that paper.
Out.
I'm going to sign myself out.
Yeah.
It's like, listen, I know I was swinging an axe, and okay, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, but that was yesterday.
I'll be honest with you. I put my baby on the train tracks, but you know, I'm different now. That was almost 24 hours ago. Yeah. You know, do you live in your past? Do you live in your past? Do you let people judge you on your past? Man, like, come on. And then I think it's so just all those dudes that she dated or married are like the most stereotypical Australian guys ever.
Alcoholics.
Yeah. Like, no, just, I'm not, Jesus Christ, man. I'm not saying that they're all alcoholics.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I'm saying like, you know, like get cracked in the head and be like, oh, are you mad about something? I don't know how to do Australian accent.
That's a really good accent.
Oh, are you mad? Like this, just like they don't. They're like, man, you know, get hit in the head, and they're like, man, hey, if you do that 14 or 15 more times, I'm out of here.
Shout out to basketball.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. I don't know, man. I don't know why those guys stuck with her for so long.
Yeah, well. Yeah, me neither, man.
Yeah, that's so so crazy.
It's hard to comprehend.
Or that when she checks out of the hospital, they just let her go get her baby that she just put on the tracks, right?
Pretty close. I mean, right around that same time.
Right around that same time. She was like, the reason they put her in the institution is she was abusing the baby.
Yeah, throwing it around.
Yeah, that's crazy. One more thing that I really want to say is, even though that we're messing around a little bit, domestic violence is an extremely serious thing, and it doesn't matter if it's male to female, female to male. It's extremely serious, and if you don't do anything about it, it can escalate to truly scary levels. So if you don't know what to do, you know, how to handle it, you're scared to go to the cops or something like that, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233.
Yeah, definitely reach out for help.
Yeah, because that's not okay. I mean, if these guys would have done that, they could have saved Pricey's life.
Absolutely.
Know? If just one of them, you know, report this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and press charges. Like, they did call the cops, but press charges, man. Like, this is serious. This is red flag behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, man, we were going to do Alton Coleman next, but this one really did suck the life out of us. So I think, don't quote me on this, I think we're going to do the Girl Scout murders.
Yeah, that's next. What we were talking about.
We were talking about doing that, and that's a pretty interesting case. So, yeah, everybody, we love you. Go out and give us 5-star reviews on the whatever platform that you listen to. Leave nice comments. Email us at findmeinthedarkpodcast@gmail.com.
That's it.
Email us cases that you want to hear. If you have a really cool case, you know, and we read about it and it's something that we're interested in, we'll cover it and give you a shout out. All right, guys, love you. Thank you. Find me in the dark. See you later.
See you guys.